Breaking September the 4th, the year 2025. A day that tore through the silence of government chambers in Burkina Faso and sent shockwaves across the entire African continent. In the Council of Ministers meeting, Captain Ibrahim Traoré struck with fire and with finality. One revelation, one purge, one decision that would forever mark the struggle for African integrity. He exposes 21 officials with fake diplomas. These were not minor clerks nor forgotten assistants. These were men and women sitting in the highest chairs of power, directors of ministries, planners of economies, overseers of health, shapers of education, architects of national destiny, yet armed not with learning, not with sacrifice, but with purchased papers, counterfeit credentials, lies bound in leather covers. It was a betrayal stretching across decades. It was fraud woven into the very fabric of governance. For every fake diploma accepted, a true graduate was denied. For every counterfeit certificate, an honest student's years of study were stolen. And for every fraudulent official in power, millions of citizens bore the cost in failing hospitals, collapsing roads, broken budgets, and wasted generations. This was no ordinary dismissal. It was the beginning of a reckoning. It was the trumpet blast that declared corruption would no longer hide behind the disguise of education. With the stroke of his pen, Traoré did more than remove 21 officials. He ignited a continental scandal, unmasking a disease festering in governments from Ghana to Nigeria, from Ivory Coast to Mali. And yet, my brothers and sisters, this purge is but the opening act. For the iceberg is vast, the network deep, and the fear it awakens across Africa is greater still. On the 4th day of September 2025, in the chamber of the Council of Ministers, the silence of routine governance was broken. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before his ministers, not as a mere chairman, but as a man carrying the weight of a nation's betrayal. And with words that thundered louder than cannons, he unveiled what history will record as the most audacious act of political cleansing in modern Africa. He exposes 21 officials with fake diplomas. This was not a rumor. This was not speculation. This was a revelation founded on months of painstaking verification. Government spokesman Ping Duende Gilbert Ouedraogo had already warned of a sweeping audit. Every credential was checked, every university contacted, every transcript scrutinized, every suspicious institution investigated. And when the dust cleared, 21 high-ranking officials, men entrusted with the lives and futures of millions, were unmasked as frauds. Think of the scope, my brothers and sisters. These were not foot soldiers of bureaucracy. These were generals of governance. Directors of ministries shaping policies without expertise, advisors on infrastructure with no engineering background, economic planners controlling national budgets without a single year of finance training, health administrators overseeing programs without medical knowledge, education officials crafting curricula yet never trained in pedagogy. Imagine the weight of this betrayal. Roads built under incompetent oversight crumbled. Budgets squandered by untrained hands left nations in deficit. Health systems directed by frauds endangered the lives of countless citizens. And education, yes, education itself, was poisoned by unqualified officials designing the very system meant to build the future. When Captain Traoré dropped his revelation, the chamber froze. But he did not tremble. He did not hesitate. He did not barter with corruption. He acted. Immediate dismissal without severance. Criminal investigations launched at once, assets frozen, names released to the public, and every decision signed by those fraudulent officials dragged back into the light for review. The message was unmistakable. Burkina Faso would no longer be governed by imposters. Understand this well. The purge was not simply about documents. It was about dignity. It was about truth. It was about restoring the broken covenant between leadership and the people. For too long, unqualified elites had perched on thrones of deception, while genuine graduates, the sons and daughters who had labored in classrooms, who had walked the long road of sacrifice, were pushed aside. For too long, politics had been chosen over merit, corruption over competence, fraud over faithfulness. And now, on that day, a line was drawn. The people of Burkina Faso rejoiced, but their joy was mingled with awe. Could such a purge be sustained? Could it spread beyond one nation? For whispers had already begun. Whispers of a continental epidemic, whispers of thousands more officials hiding behind forged diplomas, whispers of governments trembling at the thought of exposure. September the 4th was not just a national reckoning, it was a continental summons. For when Traore raised his hand against deceit, he did not merely cleanse his own house, he lit a beacon that cast its light across West Africa. And in that light, fraud could no longer hide. But beloved, remember this, what was revealed in Burkina Faso was only the beginning. For beneath those 21 names lies an iceberg vast and menacing. Networks of corruption, diploma mills stretching from Ghana to Nigeria, from Benin to Togo, selling papers for $500 to $5,000, feeding unqualified men and women into the machinery of government. A network so sophisticated it fooled departments for decades. A disease so widespread it poisoned entire systems of development. The dismissal of 21 officials shook the surface, but it was only the tremor before the earthquake. For what Captain Traore unveiled was not merely fraud, it was the map of a continental crisis. And if one nation could expose it, what of the others? If one leader could confront it, who else would dare? Thus, on that day, history was not just written, it was rewritten. Burkina Faso had declared war not on individuals alone, but on a system of deception. And in the echo of that declaration, Africa began to stir. Yet, my brothers and sisters, as great as that revelation was, it was only the spark. The true fire lay ahead, in the cascading panic, the continental fear, the trembling of governments that knew their own closets were filled with skeletons of fraud. And so, while 21 names were struck from the books of Burkina Faso, the question remained, how deep did the rot go, and how far would the flames of exposure spread? The revelation of 21 fraudulent officials was a wound exposed. But what followed, my brothers and sisters, was the hemorrhage of truth across the continent. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not simply point to the guilty, he tore the mask from a network. And in that unmasking, he exposes 21 officials with fake diplomas as the face of a larger, more sinister disease, a continental epidemic of educational fraud. Government investigators revealed the hidden machinery. Over 200 fake universities operating in West Africa alone. Diploma mills in Ghana, Nigeria, Benin, and Togo, churning out certificates like counterfeit currency. Degrees sold not for years of study, not for nights of toil under dim light, but for the price of $500 to $5,000. And these were not isolated scams. They were connected to international webs of corruption, with fraudulent links stretching into Europe and America, with officials and recruiters greasing palms to pass unqualified candidates into the very heart of government. The scope was staggering. Conservative estimates whispered of 500,000 fake diplomas circulating in governments, businesses, and institutions across West Africa. 500,000. Imagine the loss. Imagine the cost. Unqualified engineers guiding infrastructure that collapsed. False economists planning budgets that crumbled. Fraudulent doctors making decisions that endangered lives. Curricula designed by imposters who had never stood in a classroom. Agriculture ruined by those with papers, but no knowledge of soil or seed. And so the question thundered, how long had Africa been sabotaged by its own leaders? How many bridges fell? How many hospitals failed? How many generations were betrayed? Because men of fraud sat where men of merit should have stood. The response was immediate. Nigeria, the giant of Africa, trembled. Reports suggested over 10,000 federal officials carried counterfeit degrees. Ghana rushed to convene parliamentary committees. Ivory Coast descended into panic as preliminary audits unveiled massive irregularities. Mali saw officials flee their posts rather than face scrutiny. Senegal's universities were overwhelmed with requests for verification. The dominoes were falling, one by one, as the fire kindled in Ouagadougou spread like a prairie blaze across the Sahel. And beyond Africa, the ripple was no less fierce. Western institutions, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the European Union, even the United Nations, watched uneasily. Their statements came cloaked in diplomacy, but their fear was clear. They spoke of institutional stability, of gradual reform, of respecting established systems. But beneath the surface, the real anxiety was this: a competent Africa is a free Africa. A qualified Africa is an independent Africa. An Africa no longer in need of Western oversight, Western consultants, Western manipulation. For decades, brothers and sisters, corruption had made Africa pliable. Incompetent leaders signed away resources. Unqualified ministers bent to foreign advice. Weak governance invited foreign control. But if men like Traore replaced fraud with merit, if Africa were led by those who earned their positions, then the balance of power would shift. The chains of dependency would break, and the world powers knew it. But let us not overlook the domestic thunder. Within Burkina Faso, the purge was hailed as both justice and rebirth. Citizens saw unqualified officials stripped away and felt hope rising in their chests. At last, they said, competence sits where corruption once ruled. Ministries began to function with new clarity. Policies showed technical sense. Projects gained momentum. The night and day difference was plain for all to see. Still, the fear lingered. For if 21 could be found today, how many more tomorrow? If the Council of Ministers was infiltrated, what of local governments? What of universities? What of businesses tied to these fraudulent degrees? The iceberg loomed larger than any one purge could consume. And so, the purge of 21 officials was not only a national act. It was a trumpet across borders. It was a call that could not be ignored. Some nations sought to silence it, to bury it beneath bureaucracy. Others attempted to downplay it, hoping the storm would pass. But the truth had been spoken. The infection had been named, and once named, it could no longer be hidden. September the 4th was the day of revelation. But September the 5th, and every day after, was the day of reckoning. And as governments scrambled, as universities collapsed under requests, as Western powers fretted over a new dawn of competence, the greater question loomed: who had truly paid the price for decades of fraud, and who would rise to claim the justice now unfolding? My brothers and sisters, revelations are not ends in themselves. They are doors. And when Captain Ibrahim Traoré swung open the door of fraud, what came rushing out was not merely scandal, but the weight of decades of stolen futures. For when he exposes 21 officials with fake diplomas, he also revealed the hidden victims, the silent multitude who paid the cost of deception. Think of the graduates of Burkina Faso, young men and women who had burned midnight oil, who had carried books heavier than their meals, who had walked to class through dust and hunger, who had passed exams with sweat and tears. They stood ready to serve their nation, yet their names were overlooked. Their applications were denied. Their qualifications ignored. Why? Because someone with counterfeit paper, someone with political connections, someone with no knowledge of the task had stolen their place. Think of the engineers who never built the bridges they dreamed of because a fraudulent engineer held the position. Think of the doctors who could not enter public health service because an imposter wore the white coat of authority. Think of the teachers who remained in rural schools while fake educators designed curricula that poisoned millions. Think of the women doubly denied, excluded first by patriarchy, then by corruption networks that privileged fraud over fairness. This is the true cost of fake diplomas. Not just wasted money, not just poor policy. It is the theft of opportunity. It is the destruction of potential. It is the betrayal of a generation. But hear me, Traore did not merely dismiss the guilty. He began to restore the balance. His strategy was radical because it was simple. Replace imposters with the truly qualified. Junior staff who had labored faithfully but were ignored suddenly found themselves promoted. Professionals from the diaspora, long exiled by corruption, were invited home. Transparent examinations were opened, mentorship programs established, partnerships with universities forged. And for the first time in decades, people looked at their government and saw not political connections, but competence. The transformation was swift. Ministries once paralyzed by incompetence began to hum with effectiveness. Infrastructure projects advanced with efficiency. Budgets showed precision. Public services improved. Diplomats negotiated with confidence born of real knowledge. Citizens, weary from decades of disappointment, began to whisper in markets and churches, "Something is changing. The air is different." Yet let us not romanticize too soon. The pain of what was lost remains. Decades of development were sabotaged by fraudsters who never earned their positions. Roads collapsed because untrained men oversaw them. Economies faltered because false planners drew the maps. Health systems weakened because imposters held the keys. The betrayal cannot be measured only in money. It must be measured in lives, in the child who died on a hospital floor, in the farmer whose harvest rotted for lack of infrastructure, in the student who never found a job despite true credentials. Still, hope rises from the ashes, for when competence returns, progress multiplies. Already, Burkina Faso has seen savings of $45 million in efficiency. Already, infrastructure is being completed on time. Already, investors look again with cautious respect. And most of all, the young, those who had lost faith in meritocracy, are beginning to believe once more. They see doors opening for those who studied, not those who schemed. They see merit replacing manipulation. They see dignity restored. The purge of 21 officials was a strike of justice. But its deeper impact is this. It proved to an entire generation that fraud is not destiny, that corruption is not unbreakable, that qualifications matter, and when they matter, nations thrive. But the story is far from over. For if this is the fruit in Burkina Faso, what could happen if Ghana, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Mali, all the nations trembling with hidden fraud, embraced the same fire? What new dawn would break if across the continent merit replaced manipulation? What revival would we witness if millions of stolen opportunities were returned to the rightful heirs? So I ask you, my brothers and sisters, if this revolution of truth were to sweep across Africa, do you believe we would finally see a continent rising on the strength of competence rather than the weight of corruption? Tell me in the comments, does Africa deserve nothing less than verified excellence? Across the ocean, my brothers and sisters, the echoes of September the 4th reached ears far from Ouagadougou. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood and exposes 21 officials with fake diplomas, it was not only a Burkina Faso story, it was a mirror held before the world. In America, in the diaspora, elders and youth alike saw more than news. They saw a testimony, for the African-American journey has long cried for fairness, for competence to matter more than connections, for merit to overcome manipulation. And so, when Traore raised the banner of meritocracy, many in Harlem, in Atlanta, in Chicago, in Oakland whispered, "This is our brother. This is our struggle. This is the Africa we prayed for." But let us not mistake admiration for comfort. In Washington, in Brussels, in Paris, unease brewed. The International Monetary Fund cautioned against rapid institutional disruption. The World Bank spoke of respecting established procedures. The European Union urged gradual democratic transition. These words, polite on the surface, carried the same hidden tremor: fear. Why fear? Because a competent Africa is an unshackled Africa. A continent led by qualified sons and daughters cannot be bent by foreign pressure so easily. Contracts for resources cannot be signed in the shadows. Aid cannot be misused as leverage when leaders know how to balance their own budgets. Corruption has always been the soft door through which foreign hands entered. But when competence stands guard, the door is shut. And so the global stage divided. The African diaspora rejoiced, seeing in Traore a symbol of restoration. Youth across Africa rallied online, lifting hashtags like banners, "No fake diplomas," "African excellence," "qualified leadership." Academics across universities in Ghana, Kenya, Ivory Coast, Nigeria declared, "This is the standard. Competence must replace corruption." Yet foreign powers grew uneasy, for they know what many have forgotten, that true governance is strength, and a strong Africa, beloved, is not a pliant Africa. It is not an Africa to be dictated to. It is not an Africa to be exploited cheaply. It is an Africa that stands tall, negotiates firmly, demands respect. This is why September the 4th was more than a national purge. It was a continental earthquake and a global alarm. For the world has always preferred Africa weak, but now Africa has glimpsed the power of being strong. And so the question rises higher than nations, higher than borders. Can this fire of competence survive the winds of global resistance, or will the forces of the old order smother it before it spreads? My brothers and sisters, purges cleanse, but vision builds. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not only tear down fraud when he exposes 21 officials with fake diplomas, he began to construct a new foundation. And the question before Africa is this: can the fire of reform become the architecture of renewal? The road ahead is not easy, yet it is clear. Burkina Faso has already taken the first steps. Vacant positions once filled by imposters are now held by men and women with proven credentials. Young graduates, once ignored, are stepping into roles they truly earned. Professionals from the diaspora, long scattered by corruption, are returning home with skills and passion. Transparent exams, fair recruitment, digital systems of accountability, these are no longer dreams but realities in motion. The government has pledged to build walls against fraud. digital transparency tracking every franc spent, competitive bidding stripping away backroom deals, independent audits carried out without fear, whistleblower protections giving voice to the silenced, asset disclosures forcing officials into the light. This is more than administration. This is transformation. This is the attempt to make corruption not only illegal but impossible. And look further still, education itself is being reborn. No more will Africa accept diplomas forged in the dark. Traore invests in genuine universities, in scholarships for rural youth, in research programs addressing national needs. Teachers are trained, facilities upgraded, standards raised to international levels. The goal is simple. So excellent shall African degrees become that no citizen will ever again feel the need to buy a fake. The path ahead is also a call, for this is not Burkina Faso's journey alone. If Nigeria, if Ghana, if Ivory Coast, if Senegal, if Mali dare to follow, then a continental transformation will rise. Imagine it, governments across Africa led by the qualified, policies crafted by the trained, budgets balanced by the competent, education designed by the learned. Imagine the day when no African official fears a verification because truth has become their shield. Yes, the enemies of change will resist. Yes, the powers of the old order will conspire. But the tide of history is with those who demand dignity, who claim justice, who refuse to bow to fraud. So I ask you, beloved, will this fire burn only in Burkina Faso, or will it blaze across Africa until the whole continent is lit by the torch of verified excellence? September the 4th, 2025, shall be remembered not merely as the day 21 officials fell, but as the dawn of a revolution. For when Captain Ibrahim TRAORÉ rose in that council and exposes 21 officials with fake diplomas, he did not only cleanse a government, he challenged an entire continent. He tore away the veil of fraud that had crippled African progress for decades, and he lifted the standard of meritocracy for all to see. Let us name it plain. This was not about certificates. This was about futures. This was not about paperwork. This was about dignity. This was not about 21 officials. This was about millions of citizens who deserve leaders trained, qualified, competent, and true. And now the truth stands revealed. Africa need not bow to mediocrity. Africa need not settle for corruption. Africa need not trade its destiny for false credentials. The fruit is already visible. Competence has replaced corruption in ministries. Policies are sharper. Projects are stronger. Services are fairer. International respect is rising. And more than this, the young, the lifeblood of Africa, are beginning to believe again. They see that study matters. They see that effort counts. They see that truth is rewarded. They see that a new Africa is possible. But beloved, the revolution is fragile. It will live only if it spreads. It will endure only if voices across Africa and across the diaspora declare together, no more fake diplomas, no more unqualified officials, no more betrayal of the people. So I ask you, the viewers, the family of Voices of Africa, do you believe your nation deserves leaders who are verified, competent, and true? Write in the comments, verified excellence. Share this message with every brother and sister who still believes Africa can rise. And most of all, subscribe, not just to this channel, but to the movement, for truth, for justice, for Africa's tomorrow. For the standard has been set, the bar has been raised, the revolution has begun. Africa deserves nothing less than excellence. And the fire of September the 4th must never be allowed to die.